Welcome to Better World Technologies in the Chat Room. In the Chat Room is a dynamic interview series where industry leaders, innovators, and experts gather to share their insights on the ever-evolving landscape of technology and business. For this episode, I'm your co-host, Matt Bauer, co-founder and director at Better World Technology, and I'm joined by my colleague and Better World's regional director, Chris Jordan. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Matt.
We're so excited to have Morgan Costello-Hostettler, Community Impact Manager at PCs for People, joining us in the chat room today. PCs for People is a national nonprofit social enterprise working to get low-cost quality computers and internet into the homes of individuals, families, and nonprofits. By recycling and then refurbishing computers, PCs for People provides a valuable service to businesses, families, and the planet by keeping computers out of landfills and repurposing them to advance digital inclusion. PCs for People is also a valuable and close partner for us, so a big Better World welcome, Morgan.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me today. And Matt, I just have to give you some props before we start of actually pronouncing my last names correctly. I know it's a lot of letters. It can get jumbled easily, so credit where credit is due on that one.
Awesome. Well, sometimes you just get lucky, I guess. So glad we did on this. So, all right, Morgan, well, let's dive in. You're Community Impact Manager for PCs for People, an incredible organization with national reach and impact, as well as, we always start our In the Chat Room episodes. Tell us a bit about your origin story, how you came to PCs for People, and your background and experience in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up actually in Denver, Colorado, and suffice to say, did not grow up with, an abundance of resources, right? I grew up low income, and it was a situation where, there were many a times that we didn't know we had to pay the electricity bill until we didn't have electricity, which especially in Denver, which, Matt, I'm sure you know, that can get pretty cold in the winter, right? And so it was one of those things growing up where, an access to a device or a brand new device, especially, was not really something that I really, had in my cards. Right. I was able to get hand-me-down devices and things of that nature, use devices at school and everything. But when I was in high school, I, through my school, got a device through an organization like PCs for People. And that really kind of changed my outlook. Right. It meant that I was able to take more time, apply to colleges, do all of those things that I needed to do. And that actually got me, the opportunity to go to school with a pretty heavy scholarship, which meant that I wasn't going to be saddled with debt for the rest of my life. Now, I do want to be clear. I am still saddled with debt, but not nearly as much as I would have been otherwise. So again, it's the baby steps. We take the small wins, right?
Yep.
And
Awesome.
so that meant that, growing up, I always had in the back of my mind that access to technology was really something that was transformative and really necessary, right? And mind you, that was back in the, at this point, 15 years ago almost, right? And so got through college. I ended up being a teacher after school initially, and I was an eighth grade English teacher during the pandemic, right? And as you can imagine, that, like it did in every industry and every workplace and everything around the world, really changed things quickly. And I saw that even in 2020, something that I thought had been kind of dealt with. This was my young naivete, I guess you could say. I thought that had been dealt with really got thrust into the forefront. And we had a situation where, students who I was teaching just did not have access to technology. And when they got computers through a school, it was one computer, but there was 4 students in a household. And so then it was a juggling act of, okay, well, who's going to be able to use the computer at what time? And that doesn't even bring into account, the possibilities and the realities of a lack of internet access, right, to actually be able to use that computer. So that again kind of recentered the fact that this was something that was going on. So I left there. I ended my time teaching and went to law school initially. And I had to leave that for a number of reasons outside of law school. Money and family members unfortunately passing, and a million other things. And honestly, to be real with the two of y'all, Jeff, law school just wasn't really my thing. So it was all just kind of wrapped together. But then after that, really trying to figure out, okay, well, what do I want to do? I know I have a passion for making sure that, folks and especially students and kids get access to technology that they need. And that's when I found the opportunity at the organization I worked with prior to PCs for People. So to wrap that all together, I've been at PCs for People for about a year now. And that is after a merger between a Seattle-based organization where I physically am called Interconnection, and PCs for People that happened in February. And that was, Interconnection was an organization that for 25 years was doing the same work that PCs for People was doing, just on a really local level here in Seattle. And so I've had the opportunity to continue with PCs for People and continue to really serve community members and work to make sure that folks, both individuals and, like you said at the top, Matt, nonprofit organizations, have access to technology that they need to be able to fully participate in our society, especially one that is constantly becoming more, reliant on digital access, especially post-pandemic, and the move away from any sort of, paper copies of things that we still had.
Morgan, you mentioned some interesting points there. I was listening to you and I was going down memory lane myself.
Mm.
My first computer that I had access to was my neighbor's computer.
Mm.
And she was destined to be an engineer. So her
Mm-hmm.
parents, made the sacrifice and got her computer, an old Gateway. I can't remember what model it was, but it was a Gateway.
Yeah.
And then eventually we had a Packard Bell. But it was so different than it is now. I mean, people will take for granted the access we do have to technology
Mm-hmm.
these days if you have the means, right? We joke how there's a generation who won't know what the family computer is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they won't even know what that means. But once upon a time, there was maybe one computer in the household if you were fortunate enough to have one. The access to information is easier than ever, but the access to the resources to get that information is still tough. At the end of the day, there's still a hardware cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a phone or you're trying to have a computer or tablet, these things are cheaper than they used to be, but that still doesn't mean everybody has one. So with all that said, my first question for you, Morgan, really is, what do you see as the biggest barriers to digital access and inclusion across the country today? And how do you see that being addressed?
Yeah, well, I really think that there's kind of three major ones. And Chris, I think that you kind of touched on one of those, right? So I think the first one is really kind of for lack of better term, right, an assumption of the status of kind of technology accessibility, right? A lot of folks, most people, right, take for granted the fact that everybody has a smartphone and everybody has a laptop, and a lot of people have an extra computer that they don't really know what to do with, that's sitting in a drawer somewhere. And you can go to the library and you can do all of these sorts of things. And we really couldn't fathom a world in 2025 where you don't always have access and constant access, right? So I think that that's kind of one of those, is that assumption that we all have this sort of access, which just isn't the case, especially among folks who, are the most historically marginalized communities in our society, as well as, we talk about, folks who are coming to this country as refugees and as immigrants. And there is the reality that when you are coming to this country, or when you are even, starting in this country, that barrier to being able to afford an $800 computer from Best Buy is steep. The barrier to even being able to do the monthly payment of $125 to get a free iPhone on a T-Mobile plan, that is still a steep payment, right? And so these things that, a lot of the times have taken for granted, that's definitely, I think, one barrier. And then I think the second and third barrier really relate to each other, and those being, first off, funding and the lack thereof, and a transition away from funding dedicated to digital access and inclusion, right? And the second being, and it kind of ties to that assumption, a belief that we are kind of past that stage of, kind of needing to address this issue. If we rewind to 2020, when we were all forced inside and forced onto video conferences and forced into work from home, everybody was abundantly clear about the kind of shortfalls of the digital grid that existed, right? We needed to have money to address, getting more broadband access put in. We had to have money to address getting folks to have technology, but also the skills to use that technology, which goes to that assumption point, right? Which is if you don't have access to a computer, you probably don't know how to use that computer either. Or if you grew up at a time where that wasn't just part of your life, there are those barriers, right? And so we dumped a bunch of money into that, both in terms of state governments, local governments, the federal government, and that was, very beneficial. It, allowed a lot more folks to get access to technology and trainings and skills that they otherwise wouldn't have had. But now we have 5 years past that point, and for lack of a better term, there's a new it issue, right? There is different things that are being focused on, which understandably, but it means that the amount of money being allocated to digital access and digital, um, kind of skills training is much lower. The belief from a lot of folks who could be making those policy changes, both from a governmental level, but also from a corporate level, right? The folks who are, directing social giving, who are directing kind of corporate citizenship, are changing from digital access to whatever the new topic is. And that's taking out, not to get political, that is taking out a whole other piece of what is going on in our changing society in the United States, right? And so all of those things combined mean that we are almost in a perfect storm, and I'll use that because it's raining quite a lot out here, right? We're almost in a perfect storm, right, of there still being a large number of folks who do not have access or do not have the skills to the technology that they need, but shifting momentum and shifting agendas away from providing that access, providing the funds that are necessary, and from organizational standpoints, providing the trainings that folks need to be able to kind of access this adequately. So that, I think kind of answers half of your question. And I think, how is that being addressed? Well, I think a big part of it is that there are some fantastic digital access organizations and advocacy groups out there. NDIA, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, is one of them, a massive advocate for things like the Digital Equity Act, which under the Biden administration got implemented, and that was to give money to states to do projects to get more digital access and inclusion. And they are really pushing to kind of bring that back. There are, folks day in and day out who are doing the work to remind folks that this is an issue. And I really want to highlight those folks because 99% of the time, it is not people like PCs for People whose mission is digital access and inclusion, right? It is the organizations whose mission is a food bank or a resource hub for community members or a library. Those are the folks who are really doing the boots on the ground work to make sure that the community members they serve have access to the technology and the skills that they need. And they're really pushing for more of that. So I think that kind of it. I know a lot, but it is a wide ranging kind of situation that we find ourselves in right now within the digital inclusion space.
Yeah, I was listening to you there, and I think awareness is also another big issue. Something that our customers have found as a great service, value add from us is our
Mm-hmm.
relationship with PCs for People,
Mm-hmm.
because we hear it all the time. Matt and I are working with customers, and they all, have their different opinions on what they're going to do with dated hardware. But probably the most common one we hear is, oh, we just want you to wipe it, and we're going to sell it to our employees.
Yeah.
And we say, well, at the end of the day, that's a great idea,
Mm-hmm.
but your employees are gainfully employed
Mm-hmm.
and have access to buy equipment through other means. Instead, what you could consider doing is putting that hardware in the possession of someone like PCs for People, where you're going to get a goodwill turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
And then also they're going to be able to get that equipment in the hands of people who really could use a break. They could really use access to that piece of hardware more so than someone else who, might just be in a better position at this moment. So that this way they can put themselves in a better position. We've toured the Chicago facility. It's in Oak Lawn, I believe.
Yep.
Our COO and myself went there and met with Lauren and the local team, toured the facility and got to see firsthand the people who come in and hear the stories of how, people come to you because they need access to equipment, because they need to apply for
Mm-hmm.
jobs, or they're back in school and they need something that they can do their coursework on so that they can better their lives. And it's really awesome. So kind of to segue between your last answer and my next question, could you share an example of how partnerships, whether it's with libraries, schools, or other nonprofits, can improve access to technology and internet for underserved populations? And then if you could maybe share a story of how a specific individual or family was affected by getting a refurbished device from PCs for People.
Yeah. So, for the first part of that question, and I really appreciate it because fundamentally that's what all of this is about, is making sure that, community members and the folks who are working to serve community members have that access. And so, when it comes to those partnerships with nonprofits or other organizations, right? One example is with housing authorities, right? So we work really closely across the country with housing authorities, which offer low cost or completely rent subsidized housing for low income folks, right? Majority of the time in more densely populated urban centers, but if you find a county, they probably have a housing authority as well. And so we work, for instance, out here in Seattle, right? We work really closely with the King County Housing Authority, and we have worked with them to develop, for instance, a custom image where when we get computers to King County Housing Authority that then go out to community members, those devices have a really specific batch of programs and bookmarks and files that have resources for folks, and a custom King County Housing Authority wallpaper and all of those sorts of things. And that is really kind of a small part that is often overlooked, is that, one size does not fit all sort of situation. And so being able to work with a housing authority like that to really tailor make what it is that the residents are going to be getting really helps to increase that digital access through that organization, because the folks who are getting, who are distributing those computers, right, and the folks who are getting them have that pre-existing relationship, they have that pre-existing trust, and they can turn to these computers and say, look, these are devices that are not just frisbeed out by some random organization that has no name or face. That's the organization right down the street there. This is what we've done to build this, together. And this is how we're going to make sure that you get access to the devices that you need and the training that you need. And that really opens up doors and makes it so that there are folks who are a lot less hesitant a lot of the time to participate in these sorts of programs and activities. And that, I think, then steers directly into, an individual who's been impacted by this. I'm not going to share names for privacy purposes, right? But through that same housing authority, we have, gotten a device to an individual who's attending law school now, right? And has been able to go through the entire process of studying for their LSAT and applying to law school and getting in and doing all of those things on that computer that we collaboratively got to them. And that is really kind of goes back even to what I was talking about at the beginning, right? Is technology can be really transformative, and the access to that being something that is so often overlooked, or so often kind of thought about as being automatic or guaranteed, really has a massive influence when we're talking about folks who otherwise, again, couldn't go to Best Buy and drop $800 on a computer, right? We're not just talking about folks who are unemployed or down on their luck. We're also talking about folks who are working, 40, 60, 80 hours a week, but they just have so many other things that they need to spend their money on, that the computer understandably falls to the background. And especially with, cell phones, the thought of, well, we can do everything on a phone that we can on a computer. I mean, try writing a 15-page essay on a cell phone and you'll realize very quickly that that's just not really true, right? And so there's constant trade-offs, and we need to, really understand how we as an organization and how partners like y'all, right, can fit into that puzzle to say, hey, we're not going to be able to solve everything. We're not going to be able to touch on everything, but here's what we do well. Here's how we can work with this organization or this individual. And here is what just access to something as simple as, internet and a computer can really make it so that organizations can be more effective and more impactful in local communities, and then the individuals that they connect with can go on and have have the ability to kind of take those steps forward.
So, Morgan, at the beginning of the interview, you had mentioned about some career transitions, and that resonated with me. I was actually a banker for about 18 years before coming to work at Better World Technology. I worked at a regional bank here in Chicago, and we did a lot of impactful work. May or may not be familiar with community development corporations. That's part of
Mm-hmm.
banking. We did a lot of nonprofit work. So I've been working with nonprofit and mission-driven organizations for almost 2 decades now, and that's kind of something that really resonates here with me at Better World. I love what we do. I love the people we work with. And you had just mentioned about transitioning from law school to teaching then PCs for people. So I was just curious to hear a little bit more about that process.
Yeah, so teaching law school PCs for people, it seems like a couple of random little jumps, right? But there is actually a through line across all of those. It is, when I went and I was a teacher because, I really believed for a very long time that was what I was destined to be. I love teaching. I love English. I am an English nerd. And so, I really always thought that that's what I was destined to be. And when I was a teacher, I loved it, but I also saw the inherent inequalities that existed within the classroom. And I was a teacher during the pandemic, right? At a school where 100% of the students were on free and reduced lunch, right? And so those inequalities and inequities that existed there really made me want to do something else. And it's because I wanted to better help my students that I decided to go to law school, and I was pursuing a law degree with a focus on education law. And unfortunately, because of the world that we live in and all of the amazing things that happened in life, I had to leave law school early. I had two close family members pass away within 6 months, and I had changes in scholarships and things like that. So suffice to say, a lot of things kind of on my plate all at one time. And then after law school, I'm going to be honest with you, Chris. I took a minute. I took about 8 months to find my next job, and in that, I really thought, okay, what am I passionate about? What do I care about? And the answer was making sure that folks had the access that they needed. Right, that is strung through being a teacher, making sure that folks had access to the best education that they had, to going to law school, trying to do that, to do everything I could to make sure that, again, folks had the best access that they could possibly have, to this job here being something that really resonates with me personally as an individual who got a computer through an organization like this when I was growing up. It, is about making sure that folks have access. So that's kind of the string there. And I'm really happy that I took such a wild roller coaster, because I wouldn't be where I am now, and I wouldn't have the convictions that I do now if I didn't.
Matt and I we're really into this, right?
Yeah.
Matt could tell you stories about all the things he did with Better World, 10 years ago, where we were really working on being more directly impact driven,
Mm-hmm.
where we found our lane was to just support other people who are making an impact.
Mm.
But I get geeked for this, man. I came in a similar situation. So our COO is my brother. I would not know what I know about technology if he wasn't in technology. And I think there's a whole other story to tell there about how people get into technology.
Mm-hmm.
We had a cousin who got him into it, and then he got me into it. And it's kind of like when you go back and watch the early seasons of Stranger Things, right? Like the AV teacher got them into AV, right? Well, if he doesn't exist, they never get into it, right? So
Absolutely.
you've got to give people access, and people who do have the means take it for granted.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea how much some of the stuff costs. They have no idea how much it is difficult to get access to it. And then there's organizations where they'll hold on to their laptops for 12 years before they replace them.
Yeah.
And then there's ones who just throw them away every 2 years. And,
Yeah.
you know, those are still very good devices that could be reused with Windows 11 or repurposed with Linux and
Absolutely.
put in
And
someone's hands who's going to make a difference.
I could not agree more. And, I think that um, for one thing, I think it's those ripple effects, right? We don't think necessarily about, when we throw the rock in the pond, we don't think about what the ripple effects on shore are going to be, but there are ripples that get there, right? And that is very much the same in what we're talking about now with, access and making sure that you, I think, find that lane and provide the most impact that you can, I think is so important. And again, that's why at the end of the podcast, in earnest, thank y'all for everything that you're doing, and the recognition of this is such an important issue, because it's nobody's fault that it's not something that we think about all the time. I mean, for God's sake, right, Chris and Matt, there are 9 million things. You turn on the news in the morning and you got to think about this thing and that thing and this thing and that thing and this thing and that thing. And that's only if you are trying to care about, just the environment or just social causes or whatever. There's so many things hurled at you constantly with social media and everything that it's really easy to get lost, lose the trees in the forest sort of situation. And so, it's really important to have partners like you, because it is about that recentering and saying, hey, this doesn't need to be everything, but yeah, you have computers in a warehouse for 5 years because of tax write-offs. Well, you can still get those tax credits if you go here and you donate them, and there's a positive that ends up, right, in all of these different things. So yeah, I would love to, long and short, would love to have a future conversation and kind of dive into this more as well.
It's funny how contagious it is too, and then I'll shut up. Every
No.
customer we have that keeps making donations, like within 60 days, they're like, "Hey, we found more."
Mm-hmm.
Like they're
Yeah.
always finding more. They're always referring somebody else. Like it really is contagious, and it's the power of the positivity here is awesome.
Truly. And last thing I'll say, and then I will stop talking as well, is that this is also not just for businesses. This is for individuals too. So last Tuesday, here in the Seattle area, we had an e-waste drive. In 4 hours, we got 10,000 pounds of e-waste dropped off in a library parking lot from community members. And you would have no idea how many of those folks are like, yeah, I saw it on the library thing, and I asked my neighbor, and I asked the person across the street, and then everybody brought their e-waste, and they were
Mm.
coming out of the woodworks with all of this random stuff that they haven't seen in 15 years. And so if that's what it is for individuals, it is what it is for companies, it is what it is for governments or nonprofits or what have you. It's just easy to put it aside and let it collect dust.
Well, and what we've found through our work is, people take for granted that folks have access and that they have the right
Mm-hmm.
devices and all of that. And, now training is such a huge thing. If you want to join the race that's going on, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't get training if you don't have the appropriate devices and access, and you can't afford that. And so, it's not that all of this stuff doesn't exist and that it's out there and that it can be brought to bear. It's just that the machinery to do that is not in place, and so a whole segment of society is left behind,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't good for anybody, right? I mean, nobody wants that, but it's at the same time, it's such a huge gulf. So I think that might be a good topic for our next talk.
I think so too, and it's always so fun when you can see the stuff that you need right over there. It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to cost any money because it already exists, but you can't get to it. That's really kind of that invisible wall sort of thing.
Okay, Morgan, looking out and into the future, what strategies or innovations do you believe will have the greatest impact on expanding digital opportunity, closing the digital divide, and what can folks do in their daily lives to
Yeah.
support this work?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I really appreciate that question. And I'm going to kind of start at the end and go to the beginning, right? So, individuals, I think, on day-to-day basis, right? It's kind of that kind of age-old adage of, um, with recycling in general, we're always told, well, if you just clean out your peanut butter jar, then, the oceans will be fine. That's not the truth, right? It takes a whole bunch of things, and there's a bunch of things outside of our control. But one area that individuals can support this work is to think about where they are disposing of their e-waste and that old technology that they have, right? You get a new Black Friday, Cyber Monday just happened, right? Not to kind of trick anybody listening to this down the line, but you got a new iPhone. Awesome. What's the plan with the last one, right? Yes, you could, sell it on eBay. You could give it back to Apple for a couple of bucks, or you could find that local organization that you can donate it to, right? The same thing with a laptop, or honestly, even things as basic as Christmas lights now that we're in the holiday season, or electric toothbrushes or toaster ovens. All of these things, when we're talking about, PCs for people at least, we'll take those things and we use that to directly, make sure that we can get folks technology. Because even if we're not refurbishing it, we are utilizing that in some capacity. Right. So I think that's something that individuals can do on a daily basis. And I think the second thing is just take that step back, right, mentally, and think about, what the reality for a lot of our neighbors are. Right. This is not a guilt thing. This is not a and you should feel bad about yourself thing. That is not this at all. Rather, this is just a, as you have your computers, as you have your televisions, as you have your phones, think about the reality of the fact that there are a lot of folks who don't, and that it's not your responsibility as an individual to change that, but you can do some of those smaller things, right, to support the organizations and the folks who are working to do to get folks access. And then I think so that's the kind of individuals. And I think, when we're talking about moving into 2026, I'm going to decide to be guardedly optimistic as we move forward. And I think that in terms of strategies and innovations, there's kind of two things. The first being AI is ever evolving and ever, expanding. And so I think that is an innovation that does have the opportunity to bring with it some abilities for folks to for that digital divide to be narrowed. And now it's not because we can all use AI to do anything and everything. That's not it, right? But rather it is the fact that there are a lot of folks are going back into that we have to learn a new technology, right? And so in doing so, it's creating the ability potentially for more access in at an early stage to say, hey, this is how we use this technology. This is how you use this technology. Here are the skills that we need to use. And so it creates a lot of opportunities where agencies, organizations, governments, what have you, who may not have wanted to give money to do skills training for general how to do technology stuff, they do for AI, because that is the future, right? And so being able to tap into that. And I think that along with that comes the increase in e-waste that we're going to be seeing, right? And while that is on one hand not a positive, because it means more waste is being produced, and computers have a faster turnaround time and everything like that. What it also means is the opportunity for, organizations like, the one I work with PCs for People. And also I need to just take a moment to shout out all of the other small independent refurbishers and recyclers that exist across the country, right? It provides an opportunity to have more technology come in that can be refurbished and gotten back out to community members who need it. So I think that, as we move into 2026, if I could wave a magic wand and have the things that I want, it's awareness of this being a continued issue and a continued need for folks, both from individuals, the folks who are, policy leaders and thought leaders in our communities, and the business community to keep this in mind, that this is something that matters. And then also a recognition of how do we work within the changing dynamics of AI and ever evolving technology to make sure that, we are including the folks who historically have not been included as we are building these technologies and building these whole new positions and whole new workforces and everything like that. So I think that across the board, it's just about making sure that we have these conversations and making sure that we are continuing to put forward the needs of folks who otherwise don't have access to this technology.
Well, thank you, Morgan. What a great conversation. We really appreciate your experience and perspective, and look forward to collaborating more in 2026 and beyond. And really appreciate you being on in the chat room today.
Yes, thank you so much. And I am sorry to derail, but I just have to give a really big shout out to the two of y'all and Better World Technology as a whole. Truly, just the understanding and pedestal that you are able to give this issue is fantastic. And, we know that, you care about making sure that folks have access to technology. So I just wanted to shout that out and say thank you there as well.
Thank you for watching and listening to Better World Technologies in the chat room. To dive deeper into our episodes and learn more about our work, visit betterworldtechnology.com. Stay connected by subscribing to our YouTube channel for exclusive content, behind the scenes insights, and more. And if you've enjoyed, check. And if you've enjoyed the episode, be sure to follow us on Spotify and tell a colleague. Keep innovating, keep connecting, and we'll see you next time.